My name is Dorothy Callahan, everyone calls me Doc. And I had just been told my job of 12 years was being restructured because I was not efficient enough anymore. I stood there holding my badge in one hand and my supply cart handle in the other, waiting to see if anyone in that break room would meet my eyes. Nobody did. Kimberly Voss said it loud enough for the two overnight stalkers to hear, like she wanted witnesses. Kimberly said, "We are streamlining certain positions this quarter, and yours has come up for review." She said it the way you would read a grocery list, flat and rehearsed, like she had practiced it in the mirror that morning. I had mopped these floors since before Kimberly Voss knew where the supply closet was. I had learned every name on the night crew, every birthday, every kid heading off to college. None of that seemed to matter standing in front of her clipboard. I asked her one simple question, and I watched something flicker across her face for just a second before she covered it with that same flat smile. She did not answer right away. She glanced down at her paperwork instead, like the answer was written somewhere in there and she just needed to find it. Behind her, through the glass door, I noticed the security badge reader blink red, then green, though nobody had walked through yet. I did not think much of it in that moment. I only remember Kimberly clearing her throat and starting to repeat herself, and me finally opening my mouth to respond. What I said next made her go quiet in a way I had never seen from her before, and not for any reason she could have expected. What I had said was simple. I told her I understood, and that restructuring was a normal part of business, and I would review whatever paperwork she sent over. That was all. Nothing sharp, nothing bitter. But something about my calm made her shift her weight from one foot to the other, like she had been braced for an argument and did not know what to do with the absence of one. 3 months before that morning, none of this had started yet. I want to back up, because none of it makes sense without knowing how ordinary my days used to be. I arrived at Whitfield Industries at 4:30 every afternoon, an hour before my shift technically began, because the loading dock always needed sweeping before the evening trucks came through. Nobody asked me to come in early. I just did it, the way you do things you have done for 12 years without needing a reminder. I knew which break room refrigerator hummed too loud and needed the compressor checked. I knew that Marcus in receiving kept his asthma inhaler in the second drawer of his desk in case he forgot his backup at home. I refilled the copier paper before anyone in the morning shift even noticed it was low. None of that was in my job description. None of it ever showed up on a performance review, because for 12 years, nobody had ever asked to see one. Kimberly Voss started 6 weeks before that meeting. She came from a regional office 2 states over, and within her first week she had a new nameplate installed outside her door, brushed silver, her name spelled out in a font that looked more like a law firm than a logistics company. She talked a lot about modernizing the culture here. She used that phrase in her very first all-staff email, the one that also mentioned evaluating legacy positions for redundancy. I did not think much of it at first. I kept my head down and filled my water bottle at the break room sink like I did every evening, listening to 2 of the younger warehouse guys debate whether the new espresso machine was worth the money the company had spent on it. Kimberly walked past us without a glance, then stopped, turned around, and said my name. She told me that starting Monday, my hours were moving to the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift instead of my usual evening block. She said it was a scheduling adjustment tied to coverage needs. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, that payroll would also be reviewing certain hourly classifications company-wide, and that I should not be surprised if my rate came up during that review. I asked her directly if this was a demotion. She smiled the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes and told me demotion was a strong word for what was simply modernization. I did not argue. I finished filling my water bottle, screwed the cap on, and walked back toward the supply closet without another word, because arguing had never once worked in my favor in 12 years, and I saw no reason it would start working that night. Behind me, I heard one of the warehouse guys, Tyler, lower his voice to his coworker. He said, "She has no idea who she is messing with." I kept walking like I had not heard him at all. I did not know yet what Tyler meant by that, and honestly, at the time, I assumed he was just trying to make me feel better. I had no idea how soon I would understand exactly what he was talking about. The following Tuesday, Kimberly called an all-staff meeting in the second-floor conference room, the one with the long table and the framed company mission statement nobody ever read. She stood at the head of it with a laptop open and a stack of printed handouts, and she opened by talking about accountability and performance standards moving forward into the new fiscal year. Then she said something that made the room go still. She said that some positions within the company had become, in her words, dead weight, and that going forward, seniority alone would not protect anyone from review. She did not say my name at first. She did not have to. Every person in that room who had watched her reassign my hours the week before understood exactly who she meant. Then she did say it. She looked directly at me and said that certain roles could be handled by younger staff at a fraction of the cost, and that nobody, she said, looking right at me, was irreplaceable. Nobody in that room moved. I kept my hands folded on the table in front of me and did not look away from her, because I had learned a long time ago that looking away is what people expect from someone they are trying to shrink. After the meeting, she asked me to stay behind. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. It was a formal written warning, citing a supposed failure to properly log a maintenance request from 2 weeks earlier, a request I distinctly remembered submitting through the building's work order system myself, time-stamped and everything. I asked her calmly if I could see the original ticket in the system to confirm the timestamp. She told me the matter had already been reviewed and decided, and that my signature was simply required to acknowledge receipt of the warning, not to agree or disagree with it. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the pen, not out of fear, but out of something closer to restraint, the kind you learn after decades of choosing your battles carefully. Across the table, Marcus, one of the receiving clerks, the same one who kept his inhaler in his desk drawer because I had once noticed and quietly mentioned it to him, spoke up. He said that did not seem fair, and that he remembered me mentioning the same maintenance ticket that same week. Kimberly's expression shifted instantly. She told Marcus that his input had not been requested, and that if he wanted to continue offering unsolicited opinions about management decisions, he was welcome to discuss that with her directly, in private, at his next scheduled review. The room understood the threat buried inside that sentence immediately. Marcus went quiet, his jaw tight, and looked down at the table. I signed the write-up. I did not argue the timestamp again. I did not raise my voice or ask for union representation, though I knew, technically, under company policy, I was entitled to. I simply set the pen down, slid the paper back across the table toward her, and said that was fine, and that she should go ahead and write it up. Kimberly blinked, clearly expecting something else, some crack in my composure she could point to later as proof of the very inefficiency she kept accusing me of. Instead, I stood, straightened my uniform vest, and walked toward the door without another word. Behind me, I heard her ask, almost to herself, why I was not more upset. I did not answer her. I had learned, over many years and in ways she could not yet imagine, that the people who stay calm in rooms like that are very rarely the ones without power. They are usually the ones who simply have not needed to use it yet. I did not use that power that afternoon. Instead, I finished my rounds like any other day, badge swiping through the same doors I had swiped through for 12 years, ending, as always, on the executive floor. Ray Higgins, the overnight security guard, was leaning against the reception desk when I came through with my cart. He nodded toward Mr. Whitfield's office door and mentioned that the CEO had asked about me again that morning, wanting to know if I was doing all right. Ray said it was strange, how a man who ran a company with hundreds of employees still remembered to stop and ask about one cleaning lady by name. I told him it was nothing, and went about watering the small potted plant on the windowsill outside the CEO's office, the same one that had sat in that exact spot since long before Kimberly Voss ever set foot in this building. Ray watched me for a second, then said, almost to himself, that after everything going on downstairs, he figured I would just tell them. He started to explain what he meant, then stopped himself, shook his head, and said never mind. I did not ask Ray what he meant. I let it go, the way I had let so many things go, and went home that night without giving it much more thought. I did not know then that it would only be 2 more days before I found out exactly what he was talking about. On Thursday morning, I received a message on the company scheduling app asking me to report to the second-floor HR office at the start of my shift instead of heading straight to the loading dock. I felt something tighten in my chest reading it, though I could not have told you exactly why, since nothing in the message itself said anything unusual. When I walked in, Kimberly was already seated behind her desk, and next to her sat 2 people I recognized from the corporate office upstairs, a young man from payroll named Justin Reeves, and a woman I had only seen once before at an all-staff picnic. A single sheet of paper sat face down on the desk between us. Kimberly folded her hands on top of the desk and told me that after reviewing recent performance concerns alongside the broader restructuring plan, the company had decided to eliminate my position, effective immediately. She said this was strictly a business decision, unrelated to my age or my tenure, and reminded me that as an at-will employee, the company was within its rights to make this change without cause. Then she turned the paper over and slid it toward me, the way she had slid the write-up toward me the week before, except this one had my name typed at the top next to the word terminated. She said that she understood this might be difficult, but that frankly, in her exact words, nobody in this building was replaceable, everybody was. I did not reach for the paper right away. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, the way I had learned to sit in rooms exactly like this one, and I asked her one question. I asked her if she had checked, before drafting that paperwork, whether she needed anyone's approval above her own to finalize a termination like this. Something flickered across her face, quick and involuntary, the same flicker I had seen once before in the break room, except this time it lasted a half-second longer. She recovered fast, straightened her shoulders, and told me that HR decisions of this nature fell squarely within her authority, and that my question was, frankly, beside the point. She reached for the phone on her desk, telling Justin she would need someone from security to escort me out as a formality. Her fingers had barely touched the receiver when the office door, which had been left slightly ajar, began to swing open behind me. I did not turn around right away. I heard the door finish opening, and I heard the footsteps stop abruptly, right in the middle of the room, like whoever it was had walked in expecting one thing and found something entirely different. Then I heard his voice, and my chest loosened for the first time in weeks. He said, "Mom, what are you doing sitting here with a termination letter?" Kimberly's hand froze on the phone receiver. She looked up, confused, glancing between the man standing in the doorway and me, as if the sentence itself did not compute. The man standing there was Daniel Whitfield, the founder and owner of the entire company, dressed casually, clearly not expecting to walk into anything more than a routine morning stop on his way to the executive floor. Kimberly's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the nameplate on my folder, the one that read Dorothy Callahan, then back up at Daniel, trying to make the pieces fit together in real time. Justin, the payroll associate, sat frozen in his chair, his pen still hovering over his notepad. Daniel stepped further into the room, his eyes moving from me to the paperwork on the desk, then to Kimberly. He asked her, quietly, whether she knew who I was. Kimberly opened her mouth to answer, something about performance concerns and standard procedure, but the words came out thin and uncertain, nothing like the confident tone she had used with me for weeks. I stayed still, folding my hands the way I always did, watching the color drain slowly from her face as the pieces clicked into place. Callahan had been my maiden name, the name I had used quietly for the past 12 years, ever since Daniel's father passed, and I decided I did not want to be known around this building as anyone's mother, just as someone who did her job well and stayed out of the spotlight. Daniel's jaw tightened as he looked down at the termination letter still sitting on the desk between us. He asked Kimberly one question, his voice low and controlled in a way I had never heard from him before, the tone of a man doing everything he could to stay measured in front of an employee he had just watched humiliate his own mother. Kimberly opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out right away. The silence stretched a beat longer before Daniel moved. He walked around the desk, picked up the termination letter, and read it slowly, his eyes narrowing at the line citing performance issues and restructuring. Then he asked Justin, calmly but firmly, to pull up the full HR file on the shared drive right there on the spot. Justin hesitated, glancing at Kimberly, before turning his laptop toward Daniel. Daniel scrolled through it himself, past the write-up from the week before, past the scheduling change, past the notes Kimberly had entered about my supposed inefficiency. He read each entry without saying a word, his expression hardening slightly more with every line. He looked up at Kimberly and asked her directly whether she was aware that reassigning an employee's hours, issuing a disputed write-up, and terminating her within the same 2-week window, shortly after publicly commenting on her age relative to younger staff, could reasonably be viewed as a pattern under federal age discrimination protections. He mentioned the EEOC by name and reminded her that at-will employment did not mean immunity from retaliation claims, especially when the paper trail told its own story. Kimberly's composure cracked for the first time since I had known her. She started to say that everything she had done was within her authority as HR manager, that she had followed proper restructuring protocol, that the timing was coincidental. Daniel did not raise his voice. He simply said that he would let the legal team make that determination, not her. He turned to Justin and asked him to contact building security, not for me, but to have Kimberly's badge access suspended immediately pending a formal internal investigation into her conduct over the past 6 weeks. Justin's eyes widened slightly before he reached for his phone. Kimberly stood up fast, her chair scraping against the floor, and said this was completely unfair, that she was simply doing her job the way she had been trained to at her previous company. Daniel reminded her, evenly, that her previous company was not this one, and that Whitfield Industries had policies about how employees, all employees, were treated regardless of position or tenure. Outside the glass wall of the office, I noticed a few employees from the floor below had gathered near the stairwell, drawn by the raised voices, watching quietly through the glass. Kimberly looked at me then, her expression somewhere between anger and disbelief, and asked why I had never told anyone who I really was. I did not answer her right away. Daniel glanced at me too, waiting, along with everyone else in that room, for whatever I was about to say next. I finally answered her, quietly. I told her I never said anything because I never needed the title to know my own worth, and I was not about to start needing it just because she made me feel small. Kimberly had no response to that. She simply looked down at the desk and said nothing else. Over the following 2 weeks, the internal investigation moved faster than I expected. Daniel brought in an outside employment attorney to review every personnel file Kimberly had touched since she started. What they found was not just my case. 2 other employees, both over 60, had been quietly pushed into worse shifts or written up for minor infractions in the same 6-week window. One of them, a longtime forklift operator named Harold Jenkins, had nearly resigned the week before, convinced he was simply losing his edge. Kimberly was formally terminated by the end of that month. The company's legal counsel flagged her conduct as a potential violation of age discrimination protections, and the file was set aside in case any of the affected employees chose to pursue a formal claim. I never asked for that outcome. I only ever asked to be treated fairly. Daniel came to see me personally the following week and told me I could have any position in the company I wanted, HR, operations, even a seat on his advisory board if I preferred it. I told him honestly that I did not want a corner office or a new title just for the sake of one. What I wanted was simply to keep doing what I had always done, without someone deciding my age made me disposable. He respected that, but he did not let it go entirely. A few days later, my badge was updated with a new line beneath my name, reading Senior Advisor, Employee Relations, a role Daniel created specifically so that no one in that building could ever again make the kind of decision Kimberly had made without oversight from someone who actually understood what daily work on the floor looked like. The next morning, I returned to my cart the same way I always did, badge clipped to my vest, keys jingling at my hip. Marcus caught up with me near the loading dock and asked, carefully, why I had never told anyone sooner who I really was, especially after everything Kimberly put me through. I looked at him for a moment, thinking about 12 years of showing up quietly, of choosing dignity over defense, and I told him some things are not about hiding, they are about waiting for the right moment to matter. I did not explain any further than that, and I do not think I needed to. Marcus nodded slowly, like he understood there was more to it than I was willing to say out loud, and went back to unloading the morning delivery without pressing further. In the weeks that followed, the company rolled out a new set of internal policies, developed with input from the outside attorney Daniel had brought in. Any employee over 50 with more than 5 years of tenure would now have a mandatory secondary review before any disciplinary action or schedule change could take effect, a small but deliberate safeguard against what had almost happened to me, and what had already happened to Harold. I declined every offer of a corner office, every suggestion that I move upstairs, every attempt to make my story into something bigger than it needed to be. I kept my same hours, my same cart, my same rounds through the loading dock and the break room and the executive floor, because that work had never been beneath me, no matter what Kimberly once implied. At the company's quarterly town hall, Daniel stood in front of the entire staff and, without turning it into a spectacle, mentioned simply that this company existed because one person, decades ago, believed showing up early and doing the work honestly mattered more than any title ever could. He did not need to say my name. Most people in that room already knew. That following morning, I was back on the executive floor before sunrise, watering the same small plant on that windowsill I had tended for years. Through his office window, Daniel caught my eye and gave a small nod, nothing dramatic, just two people who understood each other now in a way that did not need explaining. I never needed the title to know my worth. I only needed someone, finally, to see it. So I will leave you with this. If you had spent 12 years being overlooked the way I was, would you have stayed quiet as long as I did, or would you have spoken up the very first time someone called you replaceable?